Alexander Whitmore reached across the cocktail table toward his wife's hand. The gesture was reflexive. 15 years of marriage distilled into the simple habit of connection. Catherine's fingers recoiled as though his touch carried some contagion. Her eyes, not meeting his, swept the room of Manhattan art elites. "Don't let them think we're a couple," she murmured, punctuating the statement with a practiced laugh meant for nearby ears. The crystal glasses clinked around them. Conversations continued. No one noticed the moment his world shifted. 15 years, his inheritance funding her first collection, countless nights perfecting her presentations, all dismissed with 8 casual words. As Catherine glided toward a circle of influential investors, Alexander felt something settle in his chest, not anger, but a clarifying stillness. The man who had built the foundation of her success would not tear it down, but neither would he remain invisible any longer. Alexander's fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the keyboard, finalizing the slides for Catherine's presentation. Morning light streamed through the tall windows of their Gramercy Park brownstone, catching on the polished surface of his desk where everything was arranged with meticulous care. "Alex, have you seen my notes on the Bergman proposal?" Catherine's voice preceded her into his office, her silk blouse half-buttoned as she swept in, trailing perfume and urgency. "Already incorporated them into the presentation and printed a copy." He gestured to the leather portfolio on the corner of his desk. Catherine Whitmore design embossed in gold on its cover. "And I've added those market projection graphs you wanted." She grabbed the portfolio without looking at him. "You're a lifesaver." "About last night," Alexander began carefully, swiveling his chair to face her. "That moment at the party." "What moment?" Catherine was already checking her reflection in the wall mirror, adjusting an earring. "When you pulled away, said not to let people think we're a couple." She laughed lightly, the sound practiced and dismissive. "Oh, that was nothing. Just business. Some investors respond better to women they think are unattached. You understand." Alexander watched her face for any sign of recognition that her words had wounded him. There was none. "Your car should be downstairs." He turned back to his screen, the familiar retreat into supportiveness. "Perfect timing as always." She brushed her lips near his cheek without quite touching it. "Don't wait up. Dinner with the Bergmans, if this goes well." As the door closed behind her, Alexander's gaze drifted to the wall of framed awards and magazine covers. Catherine Whitmore, Visionary Designer. Catherine Whitmore, Entrepreneur of the Year. Not once had any of them mentioned the man who helped make it all possible. The usual for Mrs. Whitmore's husband? The barista at Cornelia Street Cafe smiled as Alexander approached the counter. The morning crowd had thinned, leaving the cafe in that peaceful lull he cherished. "Just Alexander is fine," he said, offering the correction with a polite smile that did nothing to mask the sting. He'd been coming here for 3 years. The barista still didn't know his name. "How was Mrs. Whitmore's event last night? Looked fancy from the photos people were posting." "It went well," Alexander replied, accepting his Americano. "Thank you." He settled at his favorite corner table, the one with the worn leather chair and view of Washington Square Park. The familiarity was comforting. This was his ritual when Catherine had morning meetings, a small corner of the world that was his alone, though even here he existed in relation to her. Opening his tablet, Alexander scrolled through industry news. A headline caught his eye. "Catherine Whitmore, the self-made queen of New York design." The article had been published that morning. "I built this from nothing," Catherine was quoted in the second paragraph. Every sketch, every business decision, every risk. That was all me trusting my vision when no one else would. Alexander's coffee turned bitter on his tongue. He remembered the nights they'd sat at their kitchen table 15 years ago, when he'd helped her draft business plans, when he'd convinced her to incorporate sustainability principles before they were trendy. He remembered signing over his inheritance, money from his grandmother, who had believed in him, to fund her first collection when no bank would. He caught his reflection in the cafe window, faint, transparent, almost ghost-like against the bustling street beyond. For the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge what he'd been feeling for months. He was vanishing from his own life story. Setting his cup down with new resolve, Alexander opened a search browser. If Catherine was rewriting their history, he needed to know how far it went. The house was silent when Alexander returned that afternoon. Afternoon shadows lengthened across his home office as he pulled open the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, the one containing their early business documents. The original business plan lay on top, its pages soft with age and handling. His handwriting filled the margins with notes and suggestions. Flipping to the cover page, he noticed something strange. His name had been removed as co-author, and Catherine's name was now printed alone, the ink newer and darker than the rest of the document. A cold weight settled in his stomach. This wasn't a public-facing document. This was their private record. For the next hour, Alexander methodically compared dates, documents, and digital files. The pattern emerged with devastating clarity. Photos from their early exhibitions, where he'd once stood beside her, now cropped to show Catherine alone. Interview transcripts edited to remove mentions of their partnership. Press releases rewritten to credit Catherine's unique vision for innovations they developed together. In their bedroom, Alexander found himself studying their wedding photos. Once prominently displayed, they'd been gradually migrated to less visible locations, from the mantel to side tables, from side tables to bookshelves, and now tucked away in their bedroom where business associates never ventured. As evening painted the room in amber light, Alexander returned to his office and opened his laptop. A file labeled CM Memoir Draft 3 caught his attention, Catherine's memoir project she'd mentioned starting. He hesitated only briefly before opening it. The acknowledgments page made his chest tighten. To my supportive friend Alexander, who has cheered from the sidelines of this journey, friend. Sidelines, as if he'd been a spectator rather than a foundation stone. Alexander closed the laptop slowly, the quiet click echoing in the empty room. The truth couldn't be clearer if she'd shouted it. In Catherine's version of their life, he was being systematically erased, not just from her professional narrative, but from the very core of what they had built together. The comfortable complacency that had defined his life had cracked beyond repair. The soft glow of designer lamps cast shadows across Catherine's home studio, a converted sunroom where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline. Alexander sat in a sleek chair near her drafting table, surrounded by design boards and material samples. This was her sanctuary, a space where he rarely entered uninvited. He'd arranged the evidence carefully, the altered business plan, printouts of interviews, the memoir draft acknowledgement, each item laid out with the same meticulous care he once applied to organizing her presentations. The sound of Catherine's key in the front door came at 9. Her heels clicked confidently down the hallway before faltering at the studio doorway. "Alex, what are you doing in here?" Her silhouette paused in the doorframe. Her assistant hovered behind her, sensing tension. "That's all for today, Mara," Catherine said, without turning. The young woman retreated with a murmured good night. Alexander gestured to the documents. I need to understand what's happening. Catherine approached cautiously, glancing at the papers. Her composure flickered briefly before reforming. You've been going through my files? Our files, he corrected quietly. Our history. Her eyes narrowed as she moved behind her drafting table, putting distance between them. What exactly is your concern? Every mention of my contribution is being systematically removed, even from our private records. His voice remained level despite his racing heart. Why? The narrative needs clarity, she said, adjusting a design sketch, avoiding his gaze. People don't understand complex partnerships. These aren't press releases. This is our business plan, with my name removed. Alex, you don't understand the industry. Her tone shifted to the patient one she used with difficult clients. A self-made woman resonates. A husband-helped woman doesn't. The words landed like a physical blow. Is that how you see my role, husband help? Don't be dramatic. I'm simply saying that acknowledging you would diminish what I've accomplished. People would assume you did the real work. Alexander stared at her, truly seeing her for perhaps the first time. Before he could respond, Catherine's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. I have to take this. We'll discuss this later. She turned away, voice instantly warming. Martin? Yes, I was just reviewing those samples. There he is, the man behind the throne. James Preston's booming voice carried across Le Bernardin's dining room as Alexander approached the table. The two had been friends since business school, long before Catherine entered the picture. Alexander winced at the descriptor he'd never used for himself. Good to see you, James. The restaurant hummed with lunchtime conversations of Manhattan's business elite. Alexander had chosen this meeting hoping for perspective from someone who knew him before he became Catherine's husband. How long has it been? 6 months? James signaled for wine. Catherine keeping you that busy? I've been occupied with some personal projects, Alexander said, attempting to steer the conversation toward himself. Speaking of the design queen, that event at the Guggenheim looked spectacular. Catherine must have been in her element. Alexander nodded, feeling the familiar gravitational pull. Every conversation eventually orbited back to Catherine. Actually, James, I've been thinking about getting back into business development consulting, independent projects. Really? James looked genuinely surprised. I thought you were all in on Catherine Whitmore design. You two always seemed like the perfect partnership. You handling the business side, her handling the creative. That was the idea, Alexander said carefully. Well, you certainly made the right bet backing her. The woman's unstoppable. James leaned forward. Though between us, I always thought you were too talented to play second fiddle forever. The comment stung precisely because it reflected Alexander's own unspoken thoughts. What got you thinking about independent work? James asked. Alexander opened his mouth to explain, but hesitated. How could he describe his gradual erasure without sounding petty or desperate? Just exploring options, he said finally. As their meal progressed, Alexander made 3 more attempts to discuss his own interests. Each time, James unconsciously redirected the conversation to Catherine, her latest collection, her business acumen, her rising profile. Catching his reflection in the restaurant's mirrored wall, Alexander hardly recognized himself. The image seemed faded, indistinct next to the sharp reality of his surroundings. Oh, before I forget, James said as they finished their coffee. Is Catherine ready for her big moment? The Lifetime Achievement Award at the Design Guild ceremony tomorrow night? Alexander's cup froze halfway to his lips. What ceremony? James's expression shifted to awkward realization. The one they announced last month. I assumed, well, I guess she's been busy. It's quite an honor, the youngest recipient ever. Alexander moved through the quiet house with determined purpose, selecting a bottle of Catherine's favorite champagne from the wine cooler. He set 2 crystal flutes on the coffee table beside an arrangement of white peonies, her favorite flowers. The afternoon discovery of Catherine's award ceremony, which she had never mentioned, had cut deeply. But perhaps there was an explanation. Perhaps she'd planned to surprise him. Tonight, he would celebrate her achievement regardless, prove himself the supportive husband he'd always been. At precisely 7 o'clock, he opened his laptop and found the Design Guild's live stream. The camera panned across the elegant ballroom of the St. Regis, tables filled with industry luminaries in evening wear. Alexander poured champagne and settled into the sofa, adjusting the volume. The empty chair beside him seemed to grow more conspicuous as the introductions began. When Catherine appeared on screen, ascending to the podium in a stunning gown he'd never seen, Alexander leaned forward. She looked radiant, confident, entirely in her element as applause filled the room. "This honor means everything to me," she began, her voice clear and steady. "My journey hasn't been a straight line, but it's been authentic to my vision." Alexander watched intently as she acknowledged her design team by name. She thanked her early mentors, her supportive clients, even her high school art teacher who had encouraged her to pursue design. As her speech continued, the untouched champagne glass beside his own caught the light, sparkling with accusation. The minutes stretched, and the truth became undeniable. His name would not be mentioned. And finally, to everyone who believed in me, even when the path wasn't clear, thank you for seeing what I could become. With those closing words, Catherine accepted her award to standing applause. Alexander sat motionless, the empty chair beside him now a perfect symbol of his place in her life. The doorbell's sudden chime startled him from his trance. Through the front window, he could see Catherine emerging from a town car, laughing with a group of well-dressed industry colleagues. She hadn't told him about the award. She hadn't thanked him in her speech. And now she was bringing home a celebration party without warning, into the home he had helped create. The celebration party had lasted until midnight. Alexander, playing the gracious host, despite the hollowness in his chest, had served drinks and accepted congratulations for Catherine's achievement as though he'd known about it all along. Now, as the bedroom door opened, he sat on the edge of their bed, still fully dressed, staring at nothing. Catherine entered, carrying a small blue box tied with silver ribbon. Her makeup was still flawless, but she'd changed from her evening gown into silk loungewears. Something in her expression gave Alexander pause. Vulnerability, perhaps, or what appeared to be it. "I know you're upset," she said softly, closing the door behind her. Alexander looked up without speaking. The champagne and undelivered congratulations had turned to lead in his stomach. "I should have told you about the award." She approached, sitting beside him with a careful distance between them. "I convinced myself it would be easier this way." "Easier for whom?" His voice was quiet but steady. Catherine's eyes glistened. "I've been so focused on maintaining my image that I lost sight of what matters." She placed the blue box in his hands. "I had this made weeks ago. I was waiting for the right moment." Alexander unwrapped it slowly, revealing a custom platinum watch. The inscription on the back read, "To AWW, Foundation of Everything, CW." "I've been unfair," she continued, a tear spilling down her cheek. "Seeing your face tonight when I came home, I realized what I've been doing to us." Her hand covered his. "I don't want to lose you, Alex." He studied her face, searching for insincerity but finding none. The watch felt heavy in his palm, substantial, like a promise. "I'm thinking we should take that trip to Kyoto we always talked about," she said. "A second honeymoon. Time to reconnect." "What about the business?" He couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "The business needs to reflect the truth." Her fingers tightened on his. "Starting with that magazine profile next week. I want you there with me, telling our story together." Alexander felt the familiar pull of hope, the desire to believe that 15 years hadn't been built on sand. Catherine moved closer, her perfume enveloping him as she rested her head against his shoulder. "I've taken you for granted," she whispered. "Let me make it right." He slipped the watch onto his wrist, allowing himself to imagine a restored foundation. "I'd like that." Catherine smiled, relief washing over her features. "Then let's begin again." Sunlight dappled the terrace as Alexander and Catherine sat surrounded by photo albums and business documents. The weekend afternoon had taken on a golden quality that seemed to mirror the warming of relations between them. "Remember this disaster?" Catherine laughed, pointing to a photo of their first design showcase. "When the lighting failed and you charmed the investors anyway?" Alexander smiled genuinely for what felt like the first time in months. "You were the one who salvaged it, presenting in the dark like it was intentional ambiance." "We were always better together," she said, her tone softening as she flipped through the images. The garden around them, which they had planted together during their first year in the brownstone, bloomed with early summer flowers. "I lost sight of that." Over the past 3 days, Catherine had been attentive, present, even introducing him as "my husband and business partner" at a dinner with clients. The magazine interview, scheduled for Monday, suddenly felt like an opportunity rather than another erasure. "I've been thinking," Catherine said, setting aside the album, "about formalizing your role in the company." Alexander looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Chief Strategy Officer, on the masthead, business cards, everything." Her eyes held his. "You've earned it, Alex. The business development side has always been your strength." "You're serious?" "Completely." She reached for a notepad. "Let's work on how we present our partnership for the Vogue business profile. They're particularly interested in how we balance the creative and business aspects." For the next hour, they crafted talking points together, reminiscing about key decisions and turning points in the business. Alexander felt the knot in his chest loosen with each acknowledgement of his contributions. When Catherine's hand found his across the table, it felt like bridging a chasm. "We should update your wardrobe for the photo shoot," she said. "Something that coordinates with my new collection." "I'd like that," he replied, allowing himself to imagine standing beside her in the photographs, acknowledged at last. Catherine smiled, squeezing his hand. "It's going to be perfect. Mr. Whitmore, this is Elaine Jeffries from Vogue Business. I wanted to confirm a few details for tomorrow's interview." Alexander balanced his phone against his ear as he drove back from his fitting at Catherine's preferred tailor. "Of course, Elaine. How can I help?" "I just need to verify the format. Mrs. Whitmore's team indicated you'll be featured in our supporting players sidebar rather than the main profile. I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with that approach." Alexander's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I'm sorry, supporting players?" "Yes. It's our new series highlighting the partners behind successful entrepreneurs. Separate photos, separate interview questions." Her tone remained professional. "The note specified we should focus on how you support Catherine's vision rather than any collaborative elements." "I see." Alexander pulled into a parking space, no longer trusting himself to drive. "Who provided these notes?" They came from Catherine's publicist, very detailed guidance on the narrative approach. A pause. I got the impression this had all been discussed with you. Thank you for checking, Elaine. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. I'll need to confirm some details and get back to you. Ending the call, Alexander sat motionless for several minutes before driving home with mechanical precision. The house was empty. Catherine at a fabric supplier meeting. In his office, the custom watch felt suddenly heavy on his wrist. With a decision that felt both wrong and necessary, Alexander opened Catherine's laptop. They had always known each other's passwords, no secrets between partners. Or so he had believed. The email thread with her publicist appeared at the top of her inbox. Position Alexander appropriately without giving the impression that he's essential to the business operations. The supporting players sidebar allows us to acknowledge him without diluting Catherine's self-made narrative. Provide questions focused on his supportive role rather than any business development contributions. A second email outlined talking points for Catherine. When asked about Alexander, emphasize his emotional support while redirecting to your independent decision-making process. Alexander closed the laptop slowly, the soft click echoing in the silent room. The watch, foundation of everything, caught the light mockingly as he removed it and placed it on the desk. The false dawn had given way to deeper darkness. Alexander stood in the doorway of Catherine's office, watching her work. The familiar sight, her elegant profile illuminated by the desk lamp, fingers tapping thoughtfully against her chin, struck him now as that of a stranger. He moved forward silently and placed the printed emails on her desk, arranging them with the same precision she applied to her design boards. Catherine looked up, irritation flickering across her face before recognition set in. Her eyes darted to the papers, then back to him. Going through my emails now? The accusation in her voice was reflexive, defensive. I called the journalist today. Alexander's voice was calm despite the storm inside him. She told me about the supporting players sidebar. Catherine's posture shifted subtly, armor sliding into place. It's a prestigious feature. It's exactly what you planned all along. He tapped the top email. Position Alexander appropriately without giving the impression that he's essential. Your words, Catherine. She straightened, abandoning pretense. The market responds to clarity. A self-made woman is compelling. A husband-wife partnership is common. This was never about the market. This was about the script you're writing, one where I'm irrelevant. You're being dramatic. Am I? You orchestrated a reconciliation to manage me. The watch, the second honeymoon, the partnership talk, all calculated. Catherine's gaze hardened. I've built something extraordinary. I can't let sentiment dilute that. Sentiment? The word hung between them. Is that what our marriage is to you? She stood, moving to the window. We were different people when we married, Alex. I didn't know what I could become. And now? Her voice softened, not with kindness, but with finality. Sometimes I wish I'd never married. It would make my narrative so much cleaner. The words landed with stunning precision. Alexander felt something final break inside him, not with pain, but with clarity. He removed his wedding band, placing it beside the emails. I hope your clean narrative keeps you warm at night. He turned to leave, Catherine's voice following him. You knew who I was, Alex. You just didn't want to see it. He paused without turning. You're right. That's on me. The Whitman hotel room came into focus slowly as Alexander blinked away disorientation. Beige walls, generic artwork, unfamiliar shadows. Nothing anchored him to his life before. He reached instinctively for his wedding ring, before remembering its absence. 3 days had passed since he'd walked out. 3 days of unanswered texts from Catherine, of sleepless nights in this temporary space. The key card on the nightstand, room 742, Whitman Hotel, represented his new reality, access without belonging. By 9 o'clock, he sat across from Martin Schaefer, a divorce attorney recommended by a distant acquaintance. The office spoke of discreet success, leather-bound law books, certificates in understated frames, a view of Central Park through rain-speckled windows. "The situation is challenging, Mr. Whitmore." Schaefer's voice was practiced, neutral. "Your financial contributions to the business were made without formal agreements, and you've maintained separate finances since the company became profitable. I invested my entire inheritance." Alexander's voice sounded hollow even to himself. $300,000 in startup capital, which was 7 years ago, with no documentation specifying terms. Schaefer tapped his pen against the legal pad. "And you've never drawn a salary or held an official position. We were building something together. I didn't think I needed protection from my wife." The attorney's expression softened momentarily. "Unfortunately, the law doesn't recognize informal understandings between spouses regarding business ventures unless documented." Alexander left with a preliminary strategy that felt inadequate against the magnitude of his loss. Returning to the brownstone to collect more belongings, he found Catherine at a client meeting. The house felt both achingly familiar and strangely alien. In what had been his office, Catherine had already begun transformations. His desk was gone, replaced by a design table. His books had been boxed and stacked by the door. On the wall where family photos had hung, fabric swatches were now pinned in neat rows. Methodically, Alexander filled 2 suitcases with clothes and personal items. In the kitchen, he hesitated before the refrigerator, where a photo of their honeymoon in Tuscany had been displayed for years. It was gone, the space now occupied by a sleek calendar showing Catherine's upcoming appearances. Back at the hotel, Alexander spread financial documents across the bed. The reality was stark. Catherine controlled the business assets. The brownstone was primarily in her name, and his personal savings would last perhaps 3 months at current burn rates. At 48, he was starting over with nothing but his name, a name increasingly defined by its connection to hers. 2 weeks into his hotel existence, Alexander had transformed the standard room into a makeshift command center. Laptop open, documents arranged in precise stacks, coffee growing cold beside detailed notes, the trappings of purpose masking the hollowness beneath. On the screen before him, he'd begun drafting an email to several industry publications. The subject line glowed with accusation. The truth behind Catherine Whitmore design. He had everything he needed. Emails proving her fabricated narrative. Business plans, in his handwriting that she'd claimed as hers alone. Financial records of his inheritance investment. Photos from early shows showing them as partners. His finger hovered over the keyboard. One press would begin the dismantling of everything Catherine had built. Everything they had built together. The empire constructed on his erased contributions would crumble under the weight of exposed truth. The industry respected authenticity. Her self-made mythology, once revealed as fiction, would taint every achievement. Investors who valued transparency would question her integrity. The carefully curated image would shatter. Alexander imagined Catherine's face as the story broke. The panic, the damage control attempts, the inevitable questions she couldn't answer without confirming his claims. He began typing with mechanical precision, listing evidence, crafting pointed questions for journalists to pursue. The words flowed with righteous certainty until his reflection in the darkened screen caught his attention. The hard set of his jaw, the unfamiliar coldness in his eyes. Is this who I am? A destroyer? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. The hotel concierge delivered a package that had arrived at the front desk. Alexander opened it to find a handwritten note and a small leather portfolio. Mr. Whitmore, your advice about sustainable sourcing saved my first collection. I wanted you to see what your guidance helped create. Thank you for seeing potential when others didn't. Meera Patel, emerging designer. The portfolio contained photos of a beautiful textile collection, clearly influenced by the principles he'd once shared with a nervous young designer at a conference where he'd accompanied Catherine. Alexander closed his laptop, the destructive email unsent. Even erased, he had built something. The question now was whether he would continue building or become what he despised. Central Park hummed with weekend activity. Joggers circling the reservoir, tourists clustered around maps, families spread across patches of grass. Alexander walked without destination, his mind as aimless as his feet. 3 weeks had passed since he'd walked away from the brownstone, each day blending into the next in a colorless haze. A flash of red caught his attention, a diamond-shaped kite dancing against the blue spring sky. Below it, an elderly man guided the hands of a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, showing her how to control the swooping movement. Not too tight, the man's voice carried on the breeze. Hold firm, but let it find its own path. Alexander stopped, watching the kite dip dangerously before the girl adjusted her grip, allowing it to soar higher. "It's falling!" she cried, as a gust of wind sent the kite into a spiral. "That's part of flying," the grandfather answered calmly. "Sometimes you have to lose altitude before you can climb again." The kite string tangled suddenly, threatening to end their afternoon. Without thinking, Alexander approached. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the snarl of string. The old man nodded gratefully. With patient fingers, Alexander traced the tangle to its source, methodically unwinding what seemed hopelessly knotted. The familiar problem-solving focus returned, the calm assessment, the steady hands, the satisfaction of restoring order. "You're good at fixing things," the grandfather observed. Alexander looked up, surprised. "I suppose I am." "You've got to let the string out to let it fly," the old man said, his eyes returning to the kite. "But keep enough tension so it doesn't crash." Like most worthwhile things, it's about finding the balance. As the kite soared again under the girl's delighted guidance, Alexander felt something crystallize within him. He had always been a builder, a problem solver. Catherine hadn't created that in him. She'd merely benefited from it. He reached for his phone and pulled up a contact he hadn't called in years. The coffee shop in Chelsea was deliberately chosen, far from the design district where Catherine's influence might reach. Alexander arrived early, claiming a round table by the window. No power positions, no hierarchy, just equals meeting on neutral ground. When Michael Chen entered, his face broke into a genuine smile. "Alex the Builder. Man, how long has it been?" The nickname, from their days developing business strategies for creative startups, hit Alexander with unexpected force. Not Catherine's husband or Mrs. Whitmore's +1, but a professional identity entirely his own. "Too long," Alexander admitted, rising to shake hands. "I appreciate you making time." Michael settled across from him, pushing aside the menu. "When you called, I honestly couldn't believe it. You disappeared into the Catherine Whitmore vortex. The industry joke was that she had you locked in a basement running spreadsheets." Alexander winced. "That obvious?" "To anyone who knew you before, yeah." Michael studied him. You were the guy who could spot potential in raw ideas, who knew how to structure creative chaos into viable businesses. Then suddenly, you were just her accessory. The blunt assessment stung with its accuracy. I didn't see it happening. Few do. Michael's tone softened. But you're here now. What changed? Over the next half hour, Alexander shared the broad strokes of his situation, the systematic erasure, the confrontation, the separation. Michael listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. I'm not surprised she took credit for your contributions, he said finally. The whispers have been circulating for years. Anyone who worked with both of you could see your fingerprints all over her business model. Alexander felt a weight lift, external validation of what he'd begun to doubt. I'm not sure where to go from here. Start by remembering who you are. Michael pulled out his phone. There's a group of us, creative professionals, who meet weekly to support each other's projects. Designers, entrepreneurs, artists, people who value integrity and collaboration, he smiled, and who could use someone with your particular talents. I'm not sure I have much to offer right now. Trust me, you do. Michael's eyes lit up. In fact, there's someone you should meet. Elena Rodriguez runs an ethical fashion incubator, helps immigrant designers establish businesses. Brilliant creative mind, but struggling with the business structure. He glanced at his watch. They're having a working session tonight. Want to come along? Alexander hesitated only briefly. Yes, I think I would. The fashion incubator occupied a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, high ceilings crisscrossed with exposed beams, walls of windows letting in the last golden light of evening. Unlike the minimalist perfection of Catherine's studio, this space pulsed with creative energy. Sketches pinned to walls, fabric samples draped over work tables, designers gesturing animatedly as they discussed their work. Michael, you made it! A woman in her early 40s, with a streak of silver in her dark hair, approached them. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. And you brought reinforcement. Elena, meet Alexander Whitmore, business development strategist extraordinaire. Michael made the introduction without reference to Catherine. Alex, Elena Rodriguez, founder of New Threads Collective. Elena's eyes widened slightly at the surname, but made no comment. Perfect timing. And we're having a crisis of manufacturing. Come in. She led them through the workshop, where a dozen designers from various backgrounds worked on collections. At a central table, a heated discussion was underway. Our problem, Elena explained, is ethical manufacturing at scale. These designers create beautiful work, but we can't find production partners who meet both our ethical standards and our price points. Alexander listened as the designers explained their challenges. Minimum order quantities too high for their budgets, overseas factories with questionable labor practices, local options prohibitively expensive. The familiar problem-solving part of his mind engaged immediately. Have you considered a cooperative manufacturing model? He asked. Pooling resources for shared production capacity? The conversation paused as all eyes turned to him. Alexander felt a momentary flash of insecurity before continuing. Several small brands together could meet minimum order requirements. You'd need to coordinate production schedules and standardize some processes, but it could work. He sketched a quick organizational chart on a nearby notepad. You'd maintain individual creative control while sharing infrastructure costs. Elena studied his diagram. That facile could actually work. We'd need to formalize the cooperative structure. I can help with that, Alexander offered, surprising himself with his confidence. It's similar to a model I developed for artisan producers years ago. As the designers gathered around, Asking questions and building on his suggestion, Alexander felt something awaken within him. The satisfaction of applying his skills to meaningful problems, of being valued for his own contributions. Later, as he and Michael walked toward the subway, Alexander spoke with quiet certainty. "I know what I need to do now." About Catherine? About everything. It's time to rebuild, but on my own foundation this time. The cooperative manufacturing model creates economies of scale while preserving your creative independence, Alexander explained, standing confidently before a whiteboard filled with neat diagrams. The incubator space had transformed over the past 6 weeks. Organized workstations replacing chaotic creativity, clear production schedules posted on walls, samples arranged in orderly displays. 12 designers, notebooks open, and expressions intent, watched as Alexander walked them through the business strategy he'd developed. No longer the invisible supporter, he commanded the room with quiet authority. The key is standardized processes for production while maintaining distinct design identities, he continued, indicating different sections of his chart. We've already secured 2 ethical manufacturing partners willing to work with our pooled order minimums. Elena, observing from the back of the room, nodded with approval. The transformation wasn't just in the space, but in Alexander himself, his posture straighter, his voice more assured, his eyes clear and focused. "This isn't about me telling you what to do," Alexander emphasized, addressing a question from Mira, the young designer who'd sent him the thank-you note. "This framework gives you the business structure to make your own decisions from a position of strength rather than desperation." The workshop concluded with designers breaking into small groups to adapt the model to their specific needs. Alexander moved between tables, offering guidance without dominating. This was what he'd always done best, building foundations that allowed others to create. "Alex," Elena approached as the session wound down. "Fashion Business Weekly wants to interview you about the incubator's new model. They're calling it an innovative approach to ethical manufacturing." She handed him a business card. Crisp white with embossed lettering. "Alexander Whitmore, Business Development Consultant." "These arrived this morning," she added with a smile. Alexander ran his thumb over the raised letters of his name alone representing his own expertise. "There's something else," Elena continued. "Style Insider blog mentioned you in a piece about industry shifts. They've requested a statement about your role here." The familiar flutter of uncertainty passed quickly. This time, Alexander knew exactly how to respond, with truth, dignity, and no need to diminish anyone else to establish his own value. "I'll draft something appropriate," he said, slipping the card into his wallet, "something that focuses on the designer's work rather than industry politics." Elena's approval was evident. "Exactly why you belong here. We have a situation." Elena's voice was tight as Alexander entered her office the following morning. Sunlight streamed through the windows, at odds with her troubled expression. "What's wrong?" "3 designers canceled their mentoring sessions with you today. 2 others are reconsidering their participation in the cooperative." Alexander set down his coffee. "Did they say why?" Elena passed him her tablet. On the screen was a statement from Catherine Whitmore Design, released the previous evening. "While we support all ethical fashion initiatives, we caution emerging designers about consultants whose primary credential is proximity to established success rather than their own achievements." Though his name wasn't mentioned, the target was unmistakable. "That's not all," Elena continued. "Her publicist has been making calls, suggesting that designers associated with you might find themselves excluded from certain showcase opportunities." The familiar tactics, Catherine, controlling the narrative, leveraging her influence to limit him, no longer had the power to wound. Instead, Alexander felt a calm resolve settling over him. "Have any messages come in from the designers who canceled?" he asked. Elena pulled up the emails. They're apologetic, but concerned about potential industry repercussions. Alexander read through them carefully. They're scared, not convinced. There's a difference. He took a seat across from Elena, who studied him with concern. This could seriously impact the incubator, Alexander. Catherine has significant influence. But not unlimited power, he replied. And she's made a strategic error. How so? She's positioned this as protecting designers from me, casting herself as the guardian of the industry. Alexander's voice held no bitterness, only analytical clarity. That gives us the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly what I actually offer them. He stood, decision made. Can you arrange a meeting with all the designers this afternoon, including those who canceled? I can try, Elena said. What's your plan? To stand in the truth, nothing more. He smiled slightly. Sometimes that's the most powerful position of all. The conference room buzzed with uncomfortable energy as designers filed in, some confident, others avoiding Alexander's gaze. Afternoon light streamed through the open windows and doors, symbolic of the transparency he intended to maintain. "Thank you all for coming," Alexander began, standing at the head of the table. "I know there are concerns circulating about my involvement with the incubator." Mira, seated near the front, spoke up. "My mentor said working with you might limit my future opportunities." Alexander nodded, acknowledging her concern without defensiveness. "That's a legitimate worry in a competitive industry. I'd like to address it directly." He moved to the whiteboard, where he'd prepared a simple outline. "I spent 15 years helping build Catherine Whitmore Design. That experience gave me valuable insights into the industry. Yes, Catherine and I are separated, and yes, there's tension there." He paused, meeting their eyes. "But my expertise in business development exists independently of that relationship." One of the designers who had canceled spoke hesitantly. "We're just starting out. We can't afford to make powerful enemies." "I understand that completely," Alexander replied. "So let me be clear. I will never ask you to choose sides or put your careers at risk. The cooperative model we've developed can work with or without my direct involvement." He opened his laptop, displaying the manufacturing contacts, pricing structures, and business templates he'd created. "These resources are yours regardless. This was never about me. It's about giving you the tools to succeed on your own terms." Elena watched from the side as Alexander methodically demonstrated specific ways his guidance had already benefited their businesses. Cost reductions, production efficiencies, market positioning strategies. Not once did he criticize Catherine or paint himself as a victim. By meeting's end, the mood had shifted. Two designers approached with questions about rejoining the mentorship program. Another mentioned an industry veteran who had reached out, offering Alexander consulting work outside Catherine's sphere of influence. As the room cleared, Elena approached. "That was masterful." Alexander shook his head. "Not masterful. Just honest." His phone buzzed with a message from his attorney. Catherine's legal team had sent a cease and desist letter demanding he stop using industry knowledge gained during their marriage to assist competitors. Alexander smiled slightly. The real battle was just beginning. The Brooklyn Design Collective's spring showcase transformed the industrial warehouse into an elegant exhibition space. White display platforms showcased collections from 12 emerging designers, while industry professionals, buyers, and press mingled beneath strings of market lights. After 6 months of intensive work, the cooperative manufacturing model Alexander had developed was bearing visible fruit. None of this would have been possible without Alexander Whitmore. Mira Patel's voice carried clearly from the small stage where she stood before her collection, a stunning array of sustainable textiles transformed into structured, wearable art. His business guidance turned my creative vision into a viable enterprise. Alexander stood at the side of the stage, content in his supporting role. He'd chosen this position deliberately, visible enough to be present, removed enough to keep the focus on the designer's achievements. As the evening progressed, 3 more designers publicly acknowledged his contribution to their success. Alexander accepted their thanks with quiet grace, consistently redirecting attention back to their work. When fashion press approached him for comments, he spoke of the designer's talent and the cooperative's innovative structure rather than his own role. Mr. Whitmore, Fashion Business Weekly, just published a profile calling you the industry's most valuable behind-the-scenes architect, a young reporter mentioned. How does it feel to receive recognition for your contributions after years of working in the shadows? Alexander smiled. What matters is that these designers now have sustainable businesses that match their creative talent. Their success is the real story here. Yet, as he circulated through the event, he couldn't help noticing how the narrative was shifting organically. Industry veterans who'd known him during his years with Catherine approached with knowing nods. Conversations included casual mentions of Catherine's latest collection receiving lukewarm reviews for lacking the structural innovation of her earlier work. Truth was emerging without his having to force it. A natural rebalancing rather than a manufactured exposure. "You know," Elena said, joining him at the edge of the room, "there's something powerful about letting your work speak for itself." Alexander watched as buyers clustered around Mira's collection, placing orders that would support her business for months to come. "Yes," he replied. "There is." The mediation office on Park Avenue projected careful neutrality, muted colors, comfortable but not luxurious furniture, abstract art that neither soothed nor provoked. Alexander arrived early, reviewing notes with his attorney in the waiting area. The cease and desist letters had escalated to legal filings, culminating in this attempt at resolution before formal court proceedings. When Catherine entered, Alexander was struck by the subdued quality of her presence. The commanding aura that typically surrounded her had dimmed. She nodded briefly in his direction, her expression unreadable as they were shown to the conference room. The mediator, a silver-haired woman with decades of experience navigating high-profile divorces, placed a small decorative scale on the table between them. "Our goal today is balance," she explained. "Fair resolution that allows both parties to move forward." The attorneys presented opening positions. Documents were reviewed. Financial statements analyzed. Through it all, Catherine remained unusually quiet, interjecting only occasionally for clarification. During a break when the attorney stepped out, Catherine finally spoke directly to Alexander. "The cooperative model you developed." Her voice was measured, professional. "It's impressive." "Thank you," he replied simply. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve. "I've been speaking with my therapist about—" She hesitated. "About why I felt such need to be seen as completely self-sufficient." Alexander remained silent, allowing her space to continue. "Fear," she said finally. "Fear of being seen as dependent, of having my achievements dismissed because a man helped me." Her eyes met his briefly. "That doesn't justify what I did, but it explains some of it. It wasn't a full apology, but it was more self-awareness than she'd ever shown. When the attorneys returned, negotiations proceeded with unexpected ease. Catherine accepted terms more generous than her initial offers. Alexander maintained his right to continue his consulting work without restriction. As they signed the final documents, Catherine spoke quietly. "You could have destroyed my reputation. You had the evidence." "That was never what I wanted," Alexander replied. They walked from the building separately, heading in different directions. The weight that had pressed on Alexander's chest for so long had finally lifted. Afternoon sunlight filled the expanded offices of what was now officially named New Threads Collective. The success of the showcase had accelerated their growth, allowing them to lease additional space in the warehouse building. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new workstations accommodated more designers, and a proper conference room had replaced their improvised meeting area. Elena spread a blueprint across the table where she and Alexander sat reviewing plans. "The manufacturing co-op will occupy this section," she explained, indicating the eastern portion of the floor plan. "We can accommodate 6 more designers with this configuration." Alexander nodded, making notes on his tablet. "The equipment financing came through yesterday. We'll be operational within 6 weeks. Which brings me to my proposal." Elena closed the blueprint and placed a formal document before him. "I want to make this official. Equal partners in the collective, with you heading the business development division." Alexander studied the partnership agreement, noting the fair terms and clear boundaries, so different from the undefined role he'd played with Catherine. "I've watched how you work these past months," Elena continued. "You build others up without needing to control them. That's rare." "I've learned some valuable lessons about partnership," Alexander replied, thinking of the morning's mediation. "Speaking of which," Elena hesitated, "I heard Catherine acknowledged your role in building her business at the Parsons fundraiser last week. Nothing dramatic, just a mention of valuable early support." Alexander smiled slightly. "Progress. Does it bother you that she's still not giving you full credit?" He considered the question. "No, I know my contributions. So do the people who matter." Elena nodded toward the partnership agreement. "So, what do you think?" Alexander thought about the journey, from supportive shadow to invisible husband to independent professional. Each step, even the painful ones, had led him here. "I think," he said, picking up a pen, "that building something new is always better than dwelling on what's been lost." He signed with steady hands, then looked up as Elena mentioned one final piece of news. The incubator program had been nominated for an Industry Innovation Award, with the ceremony scheduled for next month. "Quite a turnaround from where you were a year ago," she observed. "Yes," Alexander agreed. "Quite a restoration." 3 years after that pivotal party moment, Alexander stood at the podium accepting an industry award for the incubator program he and Elena had built into a nationally recognized success. Looking out at the audience, diverse designers whose businesses were thriving, colleagues who valued collaborative creation, even Catherine sitting respectfully in the middle rows, he reflected on the journey. "Building others up never diminishes us," he told the audience. "But we must remember that healthy support requires both giving and receiving recognition. True partnership means visible, mutual respect." He acknowledged Elena's collaborative leadership and every team member by name, modeling the behavior he valued. What he didn't say, but understood deeply, is how necessary that painful awakening had been. Without Catherine's rejection, he might never have discovered his own strength or built something that so perfectly aligned with his values. The wound became the doorway to a more authentic life. As designers approached him afterward with thanks and questions, Alexander noticed a young couple, clearly partners in both life and business, listening intently to his advice about balanced credit and collaborative success. In their attentive faces, he saw the possibility that his experience might help others establish healthier foundations for their shared dreams. He recognized in them his younger self, eager to support a partner's vision but unaware of the importance of maintaining mutual acknowledgement. The difference was that they now had a model of partnership based on respect rather than erasure, contribution rather than sacrifice. Some journeys require us to lose what we thought we wanted in order to discover what we truly need. Alexander had lost a marriage but found himself, and in that discovery, created a legacy of wisdom that would ripple outward through countless creative partnerships, teaching others that true strength lies in acknowledgement, not erasure, in building up, not tearing down.